Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA, Episode 88 for the week ending February 2, 2018, the birthday edition. In this episode, Jay Rosen and I take a look at some of the week's top compliance and ethics stories, including the Justice Department escalation of the inquiry on global sports corruption, the review by Jeff Kaplan on his conflicts of interest blog of a new way to look at the Wells Fargo scandal. We consider the COSO framework, its new chairman, and potential additional guidance around internal controls and ERM. We'll take a look at Jonathan Marks' exploration of whether the roles of the General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer should be split on his board and fraud blog. We take a look at Sam Rubenfeld's article in the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Report about the U.S. becoming the second largest home of tax havens and how that directly has impacted the Houston real estate economy. We consider an article by Ben DiPietro, also from the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Report, about whether a company should use a CEO as a point spokesperson during a crisis. Finally, our last article is a review of a speech by David Green, or a presentation by David Green, where he called on the UK Defence Bar to embrace artificial intelligence and said the authorities, such as the Serious Fraud Office, will use newly enacted unexplained wealth orders and corruption cases around these. We then move to the discussion of the presale of my latest book, The Complete Compliance Handbook, which will be published in April of 2018. Jonathan Marks and I I'm putting on another compliance masterclass hosted by Jonathan Marks at Markham LLP. It's February 12 and 13 in Markham's offices in Florida. Finally, I announced the upcoming podcast series that I am premiering next week, Countdown to GDPR with Jonathan Armstrong. It's a monthly series for the U.S. compliance practitioner about how to prepare for the upcoming go-live of GDPR. We conclude by a discussion of our Super Bowl picks and why. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to Episode 88 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending February 2, 2018, my mother's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. The number 6 or number 1 edition. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and cohort, Mr. Monitors himself, Jay Rosen. Jay, welcome.
Thanks, Tom, and I've got birthdays on my side, too. Millie and Michaela turned 10 on February 3rd, a whole decade of M&Ms. And then my mom's birthday is February 4th, which is Super Bowl Sunday this year.
Oh, wow. So we've got a plethora of birthdays to celebrate. Well, Jay, we had a pretty interesting week in the compliance and ethics world, so why don't we hop right into it with a report by the New York Times and picked up by several, including our own Andy Spalding on the FCPA blog, that the U.S. Justice Department is escalating its inquiry on global sports corruption. Obviously, the DOJ started with the FIFA scandal of 2015, but apparently subpoenas were delivered back in January for documents, testimony, and financial records around the USOC, the 2021 World Track and Field Championships, which are going to be held in Eugene, Oregon, the 2028 Olympics, which have been awarded to Los Angeles, and other sporting entities and events. It really expands out this look at global sports. And I think, Jay, certainly we can talk about this in the context of Larry Nassar and the U.S. gymnastics and Michigan State scandals around that. But when you start looking at the monies that are spent around the IOC, FIFA, and other international organizations, it really becomes just phenomenal. The Olympics have had their own issues. Certainly, the Salt Lake City Olympics, there was a wide-ranging scandal there, and the the International Olympic Committee, the track and field championships awarded to Eugene, Oregon, essentially on a no-bid basis. Obviously, we had FIFA. We continue to have FIFA, and we will always have FIFA. Just like we'll always have Paris, I guess we'll always have FIFA. But the money that's involved here and the incestuous relationships at the top between those who are awarding franchises, awarding of games, and those who are bidding on them is something that I think when you start taking a look at it and when you overlay the just billions of dollars that are spent by public companies, either for sponsorships, for broadcasting rights, or others to be associated with those events, the money itself, the amount of money itself that flows through these is just startling, and it doesn't surprise me. But it's going to be a very painful, I think, experience for many of these sporting organizations because compliance and ethics, it's not that they was not in the front of their minds. It wasn't an existing part of their minds. Certainly, doping has been a part of the Olympic movement and other sporting events for multiple years now, and we've had multiple doping scandals. But this financial scandal and the information unearthed in FIFA, I think if you are a business that has been a sponsor, that has tried to be a sponsor, or is considering being a sponsor, you need to look at your compliance program very carefully. You need to see who your third parties are. You need to see who you're doing business with. You need to see what the relationship is with any of the national officials who've been voting on any of these sponsorships. You need to see your gifts, travel, and entertainment. You need to go through the full panoply of these issues because it appears the Department of Justice has really ramped up its investigation around corruption.
Now, why do you think this has focused on EDNY? What do you think brings them into the nexus here? Is it just because they're experienced with FIFA, or do you see other reasons why they're kind of being the sports policemen for the globe?
Well, I would say really it's probably around FIFA and their experience in dealing with FIFA. Obviously, New York is headquartered to many national and international organizations, so that doesn't surprise me either because of the location of many of these, if not their international headquarters, certainly their U.S. national headquarters. But the experience they had in FIFA, the investigations they went through following the money, getting cooperating witnesses, and then flipping people who became defendants is well within their experience from the organized crime realm. That's where most organized crime cases are brought in the Eastern District of New York. And now we have these, which are essentially much just broader, truly international in scope organizations. And when the context of FIFA certainly turned out to be corrupt up and down, literally across the globe.
So if I'm an advertiser and I have participated in one of these global events, and now you're suggesting I look into the relationships with third parties and contracts, does that suddenly mean that as an advertiser I might open myself up to some type of shareholder litigation?
Well, Jay, shareholder litigation is generally a follow-on to a corruption or financial restatement or books and records, internal controls violation, either civil or criminal penalty. That's something that certainly could happen, but it's not going to be a primary effect. The primary effect would be the criminal violations or potential criminal violations, I should say, in any criminal investigation. If the SEC or DOJ closes its books, much like it did this week with Cobalt here in Houston, then the likelihood of a successful shareholder action is much less.
From Jeff Kaplan's Conflict of Interest blog, and he decides to take a look at a case study that was written about the Wells Fargo incident. And Ethical Systems has published this case study, which is called Under Pressure, Wells Fargo Misconduct, Leadership, and Culture. And basically, Jeff starts off with a story about the most satisfying grade that he got in college, and it wasn't an A or it wasn't a B, but it was a C- over an F. And the reason why he considered it his best grade, even though it wasn't his highest, is that he learned it by ignoring the professor's instructions about the assignment. And learning to follow instructions, even in a costly way, was more valuable to him than doing any of the other classes. So this case study takes a look at 4 specific areas where there were trouble was brewing at Wells Fargo. The first one is the incentives, and that some branch and district managers considered only sales for performance ratings, and hence many people were selling more than their colleagues, considered this prerogative, and failing to do so meant they would be penalized. I took a look at the leadership again and how that sales was above all else. Employee selection systems, even before new hires joined the bank, they were socialized to think that winning against competitors at any cost was a priority. And the last attribute he looked at were informal systems, where decentralization encouraged independence and self-reliance, which on one hand had benefits to financial performance, but on the other hand likely fueled unethical behavior. So he thinks that a case study like this, although it's kind of long at 23 pages, he suggests that this would be something that you could tailor to the industry that you're in, and it would be a great, company-specific version that could be created for your employees to take a look at potential conflict of interest. So I think it should prove quite an interesting read and a good tool to use in your organization.
So, Jay, next up, we found that the COSO organization appointed a new chair and that they may consider some internal control guidance. So, Tammy Whitehouse, my colleague over at Compliance Week, reported that Paul Sobel, currently the Vice President and Chief Audit Executive at Georgia Pacific, is beginning a 3-year term to succeed retiring Chairperson Robert Hirth. Sobel plans to retain his position at Georgia Pacific while taking the reins at COSO, which is, of course, formerly known as the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. COSO itself is a collaborative think tank that's authored the Internal Controls Integrated Framework, the most widely utilized tool for achieving compliance with Sarbanes-Oxley. Sobel's near-term priority as the incoming chair is to promote the adoption of the board's recently updated Enterprise Risk Management Framework, and noting while it's relatively new, it's something that most organizations need to have a better understanding of the key concepts. What interested me, Jay, was that COSO is also developing some additional guidance to support not only the updated ERM framework, but also the internal controls framework, focused primarily on examples that help organizations understand how the frameworks are to be applied in real situations. Publishing these examples with the framework might have made the document too unwieldy, but giving some examples from different industries can help people relate to these. So I'm a big fan of the COSO framework, as you know, and I try to talk about it and evangelize about it in my overall role as the compliance evangelist, and it's going to be very interesting to see. Bob Hirth has been a great cheerleader and leader and indeed evangelist for COSO, and I hope Paul Sobel continues this role, and having someone who can put out some examples, I think will help us go forward.
Great. And did you and Matt Kelly do anything about this yet, or is this going to be one of your upcoming Into the Weeds?
I think we'll probably go. We did an initial one, program on the ERM framework, and we promised that we would take a deep dive into it and then go into the weeds, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Great. So we've got a new contributor who continues to bat 1,000. What is on Jonathan Marks' mind between CCOs and GCs?
Well, he took a really thoughtful look at the different roles of a general counsel and chief compliance officer within an organization. And it was, I thought, a really good way to think about whether you should combine these two roles into one person, because he laid out the differences in really qualitatively and quantitatively what each person must do in their corporate functions. So, for instance, the general counsel defends a client, i.e. the corporation, gives legal advice on how to comply, maintain business objectives, but is duty-bound under each state's rule of ethics to zealously represent their client, once again, i.e. the company. The chief compliance officer has a different focus, who finds, fixes, and prevents future problems, protects whistleblowers, works in the management function, incorporates, obviously, some legal considerations into compliance, but it's really more to influence process, to translate legal advice into management action. Obviously, the prong is important, but the remediate prong may be the most important. So some of the conflicting obligations that at least Jonathan sees is that the around privilege, that a chief compliance officer may be more in touch with employees and more likely to receive information. The privilege could be an issue if the general counsel is not involved. On material violations, the SEC requires to escalate certain material violations to a chief legal officer. And the defensive nature and defensive role of a general counsel may squash the transparency required to design a preventative compliance program if the chief compliance officer, the independent reporting is not present. So it was a really interesting way to think about some of the issues of intertwining those two. That's something that is an ongoing debate. Although, frankly, Jay, in the 2017 new FCPA corporate enforcement policy, I thought the Department of Justice went right up to the very tiptoe of the line of saying that these roles should be split. They should not be within one person. They didn't say that directly, but I thought it came as close as they ever have to saying that. So we're going to have to see where that might go. But Jonathan really laid out, I think, as well as I've seen someone do it, the two different functions, how organizations view those functions, and what it may all mean going forward.
Good stuff. Next up, we have an article from Wall Street Journal's Risk and Compliance Journal from our good friend Samuel Rubenfeld. And drum roll, please. The U.S. has become the world's second biggest tax haven.
We're number two. We're number two. We're number two.
We're number two. So this is based on the Financial Secrecy Index, and it is estimated that between $21 and $32 trillion are stashed away in secret jurisdictions. And this has been a steady uptick for the U.S. Back in 2013, we were number 6, 2015, number 3, and 2018, we're number 2. And who do you think still is reigning champ at number 1, Tom?
British Virgin Islands?
No, to think about chocolates and fine precision watches.
And cuckoo birds, Switzerland.
There you go, Switzerland. So one of the interesting remarks here in the article was that Gary Kalman, executive director of the FACT Coalition, said that the opioid crisis and human trafficking are both on the rise with the help of anonymous shell companies to launder proceeds. So this, I guess, is not surprising, and I'm wondering with the new tax laws and the influx of revenue that many U.S. companies have been keeping offshores to evade paying taxes, does that also lead to a more lax monetary system here where money can be secreted away?
Well, I think that's certainly a part of or at least the desires of certain persons in the administration. But, Jay, I'd like to maybe take this a little bit different direction because I was fairly well stunned when I was reading the Houston Chronicle this morning. On the front page, above the fold, was the following story. Suit, dozens of Woodland Spring homes bought with stolen Mexican money. So the Mexican state of Veracruz, not even the Mexican government, filed civil suits this week alleging that dozens of Houston area properties were bought with millions of dollars of stolen money by the state's now jailed former governor. And really, Jay, that speaks directly to this we're number 2 issue, which is that stolen money stolen by foreign officials, government officials outside the United States is being laundered in the United States to buy real estate. Houston's been identified as a key hub. Miami's been identified. Certainly, New York is well known for at least the allegations of that. So, but now we have this really driven down into a location such as Houston, which you probably would not think of as a major money laundering empire along the lines of the First Order or something even more nefarious. And a very prominent civil litigator here, Tony Busby, has been retained to file suit, and they believe there's upwards of $100 million that was laundered into the Houston real estate market from its the state of Veracruz, not the country of Mexico, but the state of Veracruz. And I've not really seen states, and I have to emphasize the state nature or the province of Veracruz, not the Mexican government. So it's rather unusual for a foreign government to hire a private attorney to attempt to recoup allegedly stolen assets through civil lawsuits, but it's even almost non-existent for a state to do so in tracing these assets. So I thought it was a really prescient article, given what Sam reported on. Is something that hopefully our Congress will start to address, because the money laundering haven that we have become, if we're going to attack other countries and try to get them to scale back their money launderingness, if that's the right phrase, I think we have to do a little bit better job in leading the way. This is not a case of leading from behind. This is a case of leading while going in the opposite direction. And if we're going to prosecute people who live in known money laundering jurisdictions, I think the United States is going to have to work to clean that up. But even more importantly, Jay, is, as you correctly noted, the different types of crimes that are hidden through money laundering: human trafficking, narcotics, theft of purloining of assets from other countries, all come to bear. So, and of course, that leads back to terrorism. Because if you can launder money, you can hide it till you need it, and then you can use it and bring it about. So clearly, part of the effort of terrorism, I hope Congress would understand that money laundering is a big part of that. And because we're number two, I think we need to take a look at ourselves.
Could we use some of the ill-gotten gains from money laundering and maybe use that to build a wall on our southern border?
Well, the problem is I'm not sure that money belongs to the United States. I think it belongs to the countries where it's been stolen from. So there are lawsuits probably to get that money back and take it home. But I suppose since this is the state of Veracruz, we could get Veracruz to try to build a wall on the other side using this money.
My tongue is firmly planted in my cheek.
Fair enough.
Picking up another article from our friends at the Wall Street Journal, Risk and Compliance Journal, Ben DiPietro talks about when to use the CEO as a crisis spokesman. And he says that knowing whether to deploy the CEO as its public face during a crisis is a tricky question for companies to answer. But two recent research papers say there are times when it's more advantageous to do so. One of the papers examined the use of the CEO as a chief spokesman in a crisis, and the other analyzes whether there are benefits to CEOs who try to build affinity with the various constituencies. The first paper was published in December by the Journal of International Management, and it found that the use of the CEO is more effective in places where people expect and accept differences in status in societies, also known as power distance orientation. So one example that they used that was in support of this was the decision by New Zealand-based dairy company Frontiera Cooperative Group, who used their CEO, Theo Sparings, in China in 2013 to respond to a botulism scare in its whey products. China was Frontiera's largest market, and the Chinese people rank high in terms of the power distance relationship. So that's a situation where it works. There seems to be three questions that you need to consider when deciding whether or not to trot your CEO out. And number one is, has the scope and scale of the issue been elevated to where it could adversely affect the brand trust? And that certainly existed in Frontiera. Has the integrity of the executive decision maker been called into question? And finally, is the genesis of the crisis values created? So if the answer is yes to any of those questions, the CEO should be the spokesperson, Mr. Hilberg said. On the other side, when we're taking a look at the affinity, They quoted a situation back in 2007 when former Mattel CEO Robert Eckert made a video to apologize to parents after the discovery of excessive levels of lead paint in some of the toys. Mr. Eckert tried to connect with the parents by noting he was the father of 4 children, but unfortunately, the remarks of Eckert didn't enhance the receptiveness of the audience to the company's message. So, I think what happens is that these situations are kind of fluid, and to quote Richard Levick, who is always an expert when it comes to crisis management, he said the use of the CEO can be counterproductive if a crisis isn't serious. A relatively minor crisis will often be inflamed, not diffused, when the CEO is the spokesperson. So, Tom, any other point of view you have on this?
So I think that CEOs need to be trained to do this, because I think that customers expect that CEOs will get out in front and will be the public face, at least for some level of reporting or statements to assure the public that the company's taking this seriously. If we take a look at the BP scandal, I've forgotten the name of the BP CEO at the time, but he was an absolute disaster. And he was a disaster not because he was not technically competent or because he didn't care. It's because he said stupid things and things that really inflamed the situation. I think the second or third week of the spill, he flew back to England to engage in a yacht race. Well, do you think the people who were the shrimpers and boaters of southern Louisiana who were directly impacted were worried about their yacht races? At one point he said, "I want my life back." Well, what about all those people whose lives were destroyed? That kind of tone deafness is something that you really can't have. But to be fair, I don't think many CEOs had received media training. They may not have received public speaking training. I hope they would have, but they may not have because they didn't view that as their role. And certainly in today's social media market, social media climate, social media complete oeuvre, that anything you can and will say will be used. Now, whether that's against you or for you is open, but with the ubiquitousness of communications, you have to anticipate or have to believe that there's a hot mic around you all the time, and that someone's going to record what you're saying. And so you better stay on message and you better stay on point.
I would say those are words to be well heeded. Let's go over to the pond to the Serious Fraud Office and Director David Green. And what did you find in this week's GIR that was of interest?
So David Green is really good about getting out and talking to his constituents, defense bar prosecutors in the United Kingdom. And he recently gave a speech where he talked about one thing that I wanted to highlight, Jay, and that was the use of artificial intelligence in the compliance function. Now, he talked about it in terms of investigation of money laundering, if we could tie back to that, and something in the United Kingdom which is called an unexplained wealth order that's can be involved in under the Financial Crimes Act. But the part that interested me, Jay, was that Director Green talked about AI and new technology as helping to speed up cases, but he talked about it not just in terms of the SFO utilizing this technology, but he talked about it in terms of the defense bar using this technology. And that, of course, means companies and compliance officers using technology to speed up the investigation of cases. He talked about in the Rolls-Royce case, the SFO itself used artificial intelligence to go through 30 million documents to weed out those that were legally privileged. He kind of anecdotally reported that normally that would have taken 30 young barristers a lot of time to do so, but that the SFO found that AI combed through everything in a third of the time, and it was more efficient and reliable, at least on that basic search. So I was really interested to see that the head of the Serious Fraud Office is talking about that, obviously from the enforcement perspective, Jay, but that leads directly into prevent, detect, and remediate prongs that every chief compliance officer and compliance professional is aware of. And this really means that even though the enforcement agencies and enforcers may lead a conversation, although in this time they may be a little bit behind in talking about it, when they start talking about utilizing that in enforcement actions, that's going to bleed down into regular old everyday compliance. And so companies need to start thinking about using these types of tools in evaluating the data that sits literally within their companies, whether it be financial data, whether it be reporting data, whether it be sales data, whether it be vendor data, whether it be manufacturing data. All the data that's available to you as a chief compliance officer, it's literally sitting in silos within your company that you can't figure out how to use because you don't have the resources or time to take a look at it. Technology is going to give you the ability to have a line of sight down on numerous silos of data that you never previously had. So I think it was really interesting that the Serious Fraud Office Director Green talked about this, and it's going to really lead, I think, be one of the two major topics for compliance going forward into 2018 and beyond. In addition to the ethical culture that has been lacking, leading to several major corporate scandals, I think that conversation will be probably number one, but what I call ComTech, AI, or technology into compliance will be number two.
So I know you follow this pretty closely. Are there any first mover companies out there who are starting to come up with any type of overlay system that you could start harvesting the AI about different parts of your business to start to lead to proactive compliance decisions?
You know, there are, Jay, but I have to say that in March I'll be premiering a new podcast called Innovation in Compliance, and that's going to be the first episode. So let me just say, as a teaser to that first episode, I'm going to talk about one of the most innovative uses of that technology in a compliance function that I'll save for that premiere episode.
Wow, what a perfect tee up. What else do you have for our folks out there?
So, Jay, I am extraordinarily pleased, and I cannot emphasize how pleased I am to announce the pre-publication sale of my next book, the Complete Compliance Handbook, which I wrote last year. It's been submitted to the publisher. Compliance Week is publishing this, and it's now available for pre-sale. It's on my website. If the FCPA compliance report, if you want to take a look at it, it's going to be published in mid-April. If you want to get your early copy now, please do so. But I'm really thrilled to be able to come out with this. It was really a labor of love for anyone who was with me over the past month or indeed the past year and know I went through 31 days to a more effective compliance program in January. That formed the basis of that chapter, as indeed each month over the past year, where I took literally a deep dive exploration into a wide variety of compliance topic, boards of directors, innovation and compliance, human resources and compliance, investigations and compliance, internal controls and compliance, written policies and procedures, business ventures, and just a really wide variety of topics that I took a very deep dive into. This will be the most comprehensive compliance handbook written by a compliance practitioner for compliance practitioners. So I'm really pleased to announce this, and can't wait till it's out in print and I can hold it and wave it, and then we can even talk about it more.
Well, congratulations. Another thing up on Tom's schedule is Tom's going to join Jonathan Marks at their next compliance masterclass, sponsored by Markham LLP, and it will be held on February 12th and 13th at Markham's offices in Miami, Florida. And if you want some more information about that or to get a copy of the agenda or to register, we're going to link to it in the show notes, and you can also find that on Tom's website, the FCPA Compliance Report. Tom, new podcast. What do you've got coming up for us?
So in addition to Innovation and Compliance, Jay, I've actually produced my first podcast, and we'll release it next week in the following series. Countdown to GDPR with our good friend and colleague Jonathan Armstrong, literally one of the UK's top data privacy, data security, and GDPR experts. I'm introducing a podcast to help the U.S. compliance practitioner get ready for the implementation, or rather go-live date of GDPR in late May 2018. Jonathan has a wealth of material that he's going to share with us. It's once again going to be a rather short, direct, give you one thing that you can do per podcast. It's leading up to Jonathan is coming to Houston in April, I believe April 10th, to put on a half-day workshop. So we'll be publicizing that more throughout the podcast and through Q1 of this year. But I really wanted to do something to get in front of the U.S. compliance practitioner, what really is going to change and what you need to be doing and thinking about if you're not already doing so around GDPR. So episode 1 will go up next week, and I look forward to being able to work with Jonathan on this.
Yeah, and just to echo the importance, last week in Irvine there was a session completely devoted to GDPR, and we had somebody there from Intuit, and then we also had somebody there from outside counsel. So again, it's on everybody's mind with that late May start date. So what else is on in my mind is the Super Bowl. What are your thoughts?
So Jay, I didn't get the picture taken, but I put all 5 of my replica Super Bowl trophies on the breakfast table, along with my 3 signed Tom Brady helmets to take a picture and send to you to help you maybe get a little fired up for Super Bowl this weekend. And obviously, New England has 5; they're going for number 6. Philly has none, and they're going for number 1. The lead up to the game has been interesting because the Patriots are clearly the favorite, but I don't think anyone's counting Philadelphia out. And they're giving them a very good chance. They've talked about the improvement of Nick Foles since he became the starter in early December, or I guess mid-December, but how his first couple of games he was downright horrible. But over the last couple of games, culminating with the Eagles' win over the Vikings, was just outstanding. Tom Brady, of course, is Tom Brady. In my mind, the greatest, not just greatest living NFL quarterback, but the greatest NFL quarterback. And if he gets, I don't know what you can say about, you can't say one for the thumb in 81, but you can say on your second hand, when you're on your second hand of Super Bowl rings, it speaks very well from you, and he's the only one that would move over to that second hand. So, and doing it at age 40, still amazing. So I think it's going to be a great game. I think it'll be competitive. The Belichick is genius talk. I'm a little ambivalent on, but he is. I mean, he is, and he knows football. He loves football, and that may be all he does, but he does that very well. So I, of course, am pulling for the Patriots and my main man, Tom Brady, U of M grads. But I also am not in Las Vegas, so I can't put a bet down. But I'm going to take the Patriots on this one.
And you're taking them straight up or with the 4.5-point spread?
So I'm actually taking it straight up because my prediction is 28-17 Patriots.
28-17. I was thinking more like 24-20, but I did a little number crunching here, and the average margin of victory for the Pats in their 5 Super Bowl wins is 3.7 points.
Right.
So that's a field goal and a smidge. And the over-under here is 48.5 in 5, let's see, wait, 1, 2, 3, and 4 of their 5 victories, they went over. And the one time they were under, which is interesting, was the Eagles, and that the total amount of points scored was 39. So I do think the Eagles have a pretty good defense. I think it's going to end up the way the Pats always play. They play a very close game, and I think whoever gets that ball last in the fourth quarter or in overtime is going to win. I do not see them falling as far behind as they did against Atlanta, but I think the one thing that can be guaranteed with a New England Super Bowl appearance, with the exception of the times they got thrashed by the Bears in '86 and when they didn't really play so well at against Green Bay. But I think the last 5 times we've seen them in the Super Bowl, it's always an exciting game, and it's down to the wire. So I like them, and I guess I like them by 4 points, which is just below the spread.
Well,
any prediction for MVP number? What would it be? The 5th one for Brady if he gets it, or is it the 6th?
So I'd have to say on my prop bet, I would pick Brady because he's going to be the one throwing it. Even if Houstonian Danny Amendola catches several, as Houstonian Danny Amendola would be well received, he's still not my main man, Tom Brady, and he probably is not getting tired of going back to Disneyland. So when he's the star of the team, it revolves around him, not because of his star quality power, although he does have some of that. What he has is he has the ability to read defenses and react better than anyone, certainly I can think of. There's some very, very good quarterbacks, some very, very good throwers, some very, very good passers. But Brady's ability to break down a defense within a 2 or 3 second view before he snaps the ball and then make adjustments, make reads and then adjustments in the 3 to 5 seconds he has to throw the ball, I really think are as well as any other quarterback's ever done, Jay.
So that means he's a bit more than a system quarterback?
You know, I would, what's the right word? Manages the game? Yeah, a bit more than that.
Well, he managed the game against St. Louis, I think, when they won that Super Bowl. But he's made a lot of progress in the last 18 years, I would say.
You know, that was 18 years ago. So, yes, he's made a lot of progress.
So, in terms, I guess we should probably call this the birthday edition, huh? Because your mom and my mom and the girls.
Yep.
So, you want to take us home?
So, on behalf of Mr. Monitors, Jay Rosen, this is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist. We hope you have enjoyed this Week in FCPA, episode 88 for the week ending February 2, 2018, the remonikered birthday edition. Thanks for listening. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA for the week ending February 2, 2018. As always, Jay and I would be happy to take your questions. You can reach Jay Rosen at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. You can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and help get the word out about the only weekly podcast in compliance, wrapping things up for the week. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you'll join Jay and I again next week, where we review the Week in FCPA Compliance and Ethics. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.